if they can sexually compromise America's children, they will become subordinates. They will not fight. So we will lose, the child loses their freedom, and then the nation loses its freedom because they've been sexually compromised. So if you're anything like me, you've heard that there's these really bad books in school libraries, and maybe you've seen some videos of like parents going in and reading things from these books at school board meetings and things. And you might have wondered, what in the world? How did these books get there? And you might have even heard a little bit about, well, you know, legally it's a library, blah, blah, blah. Well, I'm going to talk to you today about how they got there and 4 reasons why they're there. And then maybe that'll spur some ideas about what we can do to get them out. And I'm going to give you some resources in the description so that you can go see some of the ways that organizations are helping to get these books out of schools, to get the laws changed and all of that kind of stuff. So how they got there. Now, I did a video on Kinsey and I kind of gave you an overview of like he opened the door, the laws got changed, we had the sexual revolution. So I can't actually nail down the exact year. I think it's 1970. What happened was there was one law put into place and then there was like a domino effect in other states and in states and countries. But basically there was an obscenity exemption statute that went into place. And this was put together by an organization called the American Law Institute, which is really interesting because what the American Law or Legal Institute, and maybe they've had 2 different names, I'm not exactly sure, they were first put in place in 1962. And what they say about themselves on their site is they are the leading independent organization in the United States producing scholarly work to clarify, modernize, and otherwise improve the law. And I guess part of me is like, yeah, there's some additional issues with like technology and things, but frankly, the laws don't change a whole lot because they're laws of human nature that come from God. And so we actually don't need to do as much to our laws as we think we have to do. We're always writing laws and making new laws and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, they draft, discuss, revise, and publish restatements of the law, model codes, and principles of law that are enormously influential in the courts and legislatures, as well as in legal scholarship and education. They say that these things that they do contribute to the public good. So there's this thing called a model code or a model penal code. And so they made a recommendation for a model code. Now, this is coming off of Kinsey. He's working with all of these governments into the mid-50s. We've got the pill, we've got the free love, we've got the laws changing, and then there's this model code put into place, these recommendations made to the federal government, and the federal government passes the obscenity exemption statute. And this was originally for police officers, so that the police officers could legally go in and seize certain things around, especially around child pornography and child abuse that could be used against these criminals. So that seems like a really great thing, right? Which it can be, and it is. Like, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but what happened was because the policemen got an exemption, then the schools were like, oh, wait a minute, we need an exemption too, which when they're not law enforcement, I have no idea how that argument was made, but that bridge was built. And then after that, the libraries were like, well, if the schools get the exemptions, then the libraries get them too. We need to be able to have certain things available to the public that under this obscenity exemption. So you're exempt from seeing the obscene things. And there's lots of different codes that you can go look up online. One of the things I found really fascinating was that there was another note saying some legal experts and a late Supreme Court justice and some conservative commentators have voiced concern about ALI, this American Law or Legal Institute that put this model code in place, that they rewrite the law as they want it to be instead of as it is. So not surprising, probably. So that is why these books are in the schools, because the schools and the libraries have an exemption about having obscenity. This is why you can show certain obscene materials to a child or even read them a specific book in a school library during school hours, and it's fully legal. But if you walked outside onto the sidewalk after school hours, you could then be arrested for reading the same book to the child. And so if we're going to inundate the children, and I'm going to talk about 4 reasons that are motivating that are behind that are a bit sinister, that's how you drive it. They're placed in school libraries and the kids have access to it. And I've given you some links in the description around this. They're being snuck in also into the curriculum under the diversity and the prejudice stuff. So one of the things that's driving, unfortunately, there are some of this diversity stuff and this focus on race and all that stuff, these marginalized voices, this allows more junk to get into the school curriculum. And so there is a textbook called Marginalized Voices. It's an English curriculum. Because this stuff isn't necessarily really scientific. I mean, they already got sex ed in the schools, but this is being seen as English curriculum. And I've seen the pictures. They're so vile. These drawings of certain acts are exposing our students to diversity. And then there's transgender and equity stuff that's also smuggled in that way. And so let's talk about the obstacles that we have to getting them out. Okay, so they're there. So here's our obstacles. Number 1, the superintendents are still autonomous, even though the school boards vote things down. Because they're independent school districts, the superintendents can make certain independent decisions. And so that's a huge obstacle. And, you know, our schools, especially the public schools, have become more and more top heavy, administration heavy, and it's what's zapping so many of the resources and the money. And then you get to the college level and it's just like inundation like mad. But so the superintendents are still autonomous. Here's the second one. And I know this is going to sound crazy because it sounded crazy to me when I heard it. So I went and did the research, and I'm going to tell you, it's real. So George Soros, go learn about him. If you don't know anything about him, I could maybe do more research and give you a video or something, but he's a not good guy, and he is very, very wealthy. And so he is funding the campaigns of district attorneys all over the United States. And it is estimated at this moment that 1/5 of all of the US district attorneys have been funded by George Soros. And I was like, is this really a thing? And so I put in, if you put in a search, how many district attorneys did George Soros get elected? You'll find a whole bunch of articles. Just put that in a Google search and you'll see what I'm talking about. And just to kind of corroborate that and give you a little other little resource and bit of information is really fascinating. I went to a meeting last night and I didn't really know. I went to see someone. It was recommended that I go. Turns out it was run by an organization called County Citizens Defending Freedom. And I learned about the background of this organization. So there's a guy, I don't know his name, I'd have to go look it up, who is an avid entrepreneur, really, really wealthy. I guess he's in Florida, and a patriot and loves America. And so he went to some people, I think maybe she said Rick Green, but I'm not sure. He was like, okay, what can I do to use my resources to help, create more freedom in America? And he was encouraged to work at the county level and really try to work grassroots up, to get local people involved. It's always the best way for government to happen anyway. And so they created the County Citizens Defending Freedom organization. Now this is pretty cool. So they have this CCDF constructs and principles. And I'm just going to tell you that, like, the Declaration is in here and the Bill of Rights and the whole Constitution. But this is really cool. So right here it has core principles, and I'm just going to read you the first couple. Our operational standards of measure shall be the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, the United States Constitution, and the Federalist Papers in accordance with their original intent. That's pretty great. Number 2, our moral standards shall be based upon the laws of nature and of nature's God, as written in the Declaration of Independence. So pretty great. And then these standards of belief, where they talk about how they feel about amendments, life begins in the womb and ends at the time of natural death, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is what we would call a conservative organization, but trying to defend freedom. And the reason I'm bringing this up is it's really cool and I just want you to know about it. But I said, so I've not heard of you before. And she's like, oh, well, we just like got started in like 2020. I was like, oh, wow. So you're brand new. So I wouldn't have heard of you, because I've been involved in like ELO Forum and been, you know, like been involved in grassroots government and things like that in the past. And she said, yeah. And I said, so are you like in all the counties across the United States? And she's like, no, we are in 100 counties. And I said, well, why is that? And she said, because those are the ones where George Soros is actively putting money and has active working district attorneys. And right now, Northern Texas, the counties in Northern Texas, my county in particular, her county right next door in Denton, those are some of the counties that are being the most violently attacked. And guess why? Because they're the most God-fearing. I mean, that's just the conversation we had last night. Like, they are the ones that are still believing the Constitution and are still fighting for, First Amendment and all of that stuff. And so it really is the case that there are people that are funding. And the reason that matters is because the district attorneys will not, if they know who's kind of keeping them in power, they'll just ignore stuff. So when certain cases come up, they ignore them. And so that's what George Soros realized, is that if I can control the people that help control like the laws and the defense of those laws, and he just realized the district attorneys have a ton of power. And so that's what's happening. And it's so funny to like, sometimes I listen to myself when I'm talking about these kinds of things, and I think I probably sound like a total right-wing freak. I probably sound like a total conspiracy theorist person, but I just do my homework. Like, I'm just telling you that, like, the research that I discovered, like, this is not crazy stuff. Like, it's all out there. It's all valid. And it's so shocking. So the third reason that this is happening, and an obstacle to getting them out, but also really why this is happening, is in my research, what I came to realize, the next two things I'm going to tell you are really the crux of the motivation for those that don't love God, that don't love human beings, that don't love their brothers and sisters on the planet. This is a fight against what's true and real. The transcendentals, which I'll talk about in the future, the truth, goodness, and beauty, these are ideas that we judge by. These are the first of all first principles. These are the key things that have been talked about for centuries. And they're the way in which we judge all the things for their validity, for whether or not they will enrich or, human life or make it worse. C.S. Lewis talked about how until really modern times, education was meant to basically bring the person into alignment with reality and truth, not the other way around. Like today, the goal is we're going to just rewrite history or just completely ignore it. We're going to remove God. And this is something that Lewis and many other authors talk about as well, is like this idea that there's not actually a fundamental truth. This is the first time humans have ever really tried this. And it's just not going to go down well. Because The point of education was to civilize the child, and you civilize the child by making him hate what was ugly and love what was beautiful. He talks about how Aristotle says the aim of education is to make the pupil like and dislike what he ought, and to see whatever was amiss in ill works of man or ill-grown works of nature, to delight and praise beauty, to receive into his soul and be nourished by it so that he becomes a man of a gentle heart, to domesticate the raw passions, not suppressing or excising them, which would deprive the soul of its energy, but forming and informing them as an art. That's Alan Bloom. So it's never been done that we've thrown out all of the standards. And this just goes back to Nietzsche and others. Like, if God is dead, you know, we started to unravel the authority of the church. And then that led to, wait a minute, God's probably dead, which led to, well, let's just make it up ourselves. And what's kind of great about that, people don't realize that they're aligning themselves with this worldview, and that fundamentally this is what they really think. When they go along with things, they just don't realize what they're going along with, because fundamentally this is just basically saying, this is so great because there's no rules, so we can just make them up. We'll just make them up ourselves. But the problem is that we keep defaulting to what's real and what's true, because oh my gosh, I was watching this really great video the other day on the Whatever podcast, and he was talking about, there was this girl and she was like, you know, you're an idiot if you don't know about women's rights. I mean, you don't know that women have been oppressed all through history. That's what she was saying. And this guy was like, look, men have been oppressed too. And she was like, you don't know what you're talking about. You're a total idiot, blah, blah, blah. And he was just like, look, the reason that men had the right to vote and women did not was because men have to conscript in the army, and they go to war and die for you. And you sit at home comfortably. And so that is what gave them, I mean, you have all the rights that men have and all the privileges men have, and you still don't have some of the duties and responsibilities they have. And he was right. And, you know, he was just basically saying, as soon as the going gets tough, we revert back to traditional roles. And I don't even think this guy is even conservative or God-fearing or particularly like whatever. He just nailed it in terms of how this is just not going to work. This my truth, your truth thing is just not going to work. So we want to, you know, these people are trying to turn upside down the moral structure, attack the family, and make all forms of sexual behavior permissive. So the last reason, the ultimate reason why this is happening, and this is, this really hit me when I first started to understand it. And I hope it doesn't sound too crazy to you, because I really think it's true. When people are violated sexually, when you give pornography to young children, the deepest core of them becomes broken. That special, most precious part of them that bonds with most highly with another human being and creates life, when it's violated at a young age, it's very difficult to come back from that. And so what you do is you violate the children first for your own pleasure, because you live in this I-it relationship. We talk about this in the academy all the time, seeing people as people, staying out of self-deception, not seeing them as its, but as people. And you rob them of their ability. They lack discipline, courage, and purpose, because they must draw inward to try to heal, because they're so deeply broken and wounded. And, you know, you don't have to look very far to know that sex trafficking is just on the rise, on the rise, on the rise, on the rise. You know, and lots of people will tell you, well, we think we did a great job of obliterating certain kinds of slavery in America, but other kinds of slavery are just on the rise. I want to read you something from Gabrielle Kubi. She says, The beautiful gift of sexuality requires cultivation if it is to allow people to have successful relationships and a successful life. And this is one of the things that I'm seeing a lot in these detransition videos too, is that you cut off proper sexual function and you can't layer that with new proper sexual function. And so these people are totally cut off from some of the most beautiful experiences that they could have. Now, you have to cultivate it properly to have successful relationships and a successful life. The opposite, the coarse acting out of all desires, distorts the person and the culture. A person sexualized from childhood is taught it is right to live out your instincts without reflection. It is wrong for you to set boundaries for them. He uses his own body and the bodies of other people for satisfying the sex drive instead of for expressing personal love. This drive is powerful because it has the task of ensuring the survival of humankind. The person who does not learn to cultivate it, being enculturated, being civilized, we are becoming less civilized, who doesn't cultivate it for the expression of love and the creation of new life is ruled by it. It's a power inherent in you, and it can control you or you can control it. It's basically that simple. And if you're violated at too young an age and your relationship with the sexual part of you becomes distorted, it is incredibly difficult to come back from that. And it always reminds me of what Jesus said, that you violate one of these children, it'd be better for you that millstone hung around your neck and you drown in the bottom of the ocean. Because he understands that when you violate children in this way, it's one of the worst things you can do to a human being. A person driven by his passions in this way loses his freedom. He no longer hears the voice of his conscience. He loses the ability to love and the ability to bond. He loses the desire to give children the gift of life. He becomes incapable of cultural achievement. He becomes mentally and physically sick. He loses the desire and ability to maintain his own culture, thereby setting it up for dominion by a more energetic one. Now the attack is aimed at the person's innermost moral structure, the one that empowers him to be free. The axe is now being laid at the root. And Yakuboyan talks about how sex is the most powerful weapon on earth. And I want to end with this. It's a downer, but it's powerful. It's important that we get involved in this fight. It's important that you use the resources below. It's important that you go to meetings in your area, and it's important that you educate yourself and build a family culture built on natural law and principles and first principles. And if you need to understand that more, go do our 7-day free trial and join the Academy, band with us, become part of our community and start making a difference in this area. Because like Yakuboyan said, if they can sexually compromise America's children, they will become subordinates. They will not fight. So we will lose, the child loses their freedom, and then the nation loses its freedom because they've been sexually compromised. So again, please join the fight and do something about it locally. Go to your Board of Education meetings, find out what's going on in your schools, and fight the legislation. Get involved in any way that you can, because this is a fight for the thing that is very most precious above anything else.